Hi, fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic, a fantasy writer's kit bag. I'm fantasy writer Neil Mack, the author of Moondog and the Reed Leopard, and I want to share my love of folklore, local history and nature mythology with writers and creatives like you on my regular podcasts. It's designed with fellow indie publishers and writers in mind, but all fans of fantasy fiction are very welcome to join in. In my fantasy writer's kit bag, writers, artists and creatives will find lots of ideas and discussion about things such as potions, dark arts, fabulous creatures, folktale studies, nature lore, and the interesting history behind the myth and magic that underpins our understanding of the fictional universe. What I've been up to. Hi, last weekend I was in Shrewsbury, as you know, and I was walking around the local village where we were staying, and I saw the barley harvest, which was golden and ready for collection. And it reminded me that in Staines we have an area called Lammas. Lammas, Lammas, is celebrated on the 1st of August, and it marks the annual wheat harvest, which is the first of 3 harvest festivals to be celebrated each year in Europe. On Lammastide, it was once customary to bring a loaf of bread to church, and this loaf of bread would have been made from the new crop of cereal. And the new crop of cereal began to be harvested at Lammastide, and that's the period that falls halfway between the summer solstice and the autumn-September equinox. And so this first loaf of bread, the first loaf, was blessed by priests, and in Anglo-Saxon times it might have been employed in protective rituals. For example, the Lammas bread might be broken into 4 bits, and each bit placed at a corner of a barn to protect the rest of the harvested grain. The Lammas is also known in Britain as the Gule of August, G-U-L-E, and apparently the word Gule just means feast in ancient Brittonic. So the Gule of August would translate to the Feast of August. In the medieval agricultural year, Lammas also marked the end of the hay harvest, a busy time that had begun after midsummer and finished at the beginning of the cereal harvest. Here in the town where I live, we have a recreation ground known as the Lammas. It's a very ancient word, and it comes from the nearby Lammas Fields that were once growing along the Thameside meadows. And nearby there's an ancient crop field known as the Thorpe Hay Meadow, which incidentally is owned by and managed by the Surrey Wildlife Trust. And this was an area that was once farmed by monks from the nearby medieval Chertsey Abbey. This crop field is thought to be the last remaining example of an untouched Thames Valley hay meadow in Surrey. Those monks, way back, once grew ancient strains of meadow barlow in this place. The field has been preserved, unfarmed and unsullied for all of these years, so when you visit it, you can see the same wild grasses growing on the edges that were once farmed by monks in the 7th and 8th century. I like to imagine those monks wearing their dark habits, making the first cut of the Lammas barley at Lammastide. Imagine one of those monks. He stops for a rest. It's a hot work, cutting grass in August, so he keeps his hood up to avoid burning his bald head. He leans against his scythe. What does that image conjure to you? To the people of Staines and Egham and Chertsey, and in my area in the 7th century, that image would represent everything good in life. It would represent bread to eat, beer to drink, the first harvest, the expectation that starvation would be avoided. But now think again. A monk, leaning on his scythe, with his hood up. Doesn't he signify the opposite of all the good things? Doesn't he signify death? So I was thinking about Father Time, and about his representation, the way he carries a scythe and wears a monk's habit. Father Time is the personification of time, and in Greek mythology, Kronos with a K or C, is depicted as carrying a scythe or sickle, and a special festival called Cronia is held in his honour to celebrate the harvest. Kronos was later identified with Kronos with an H, Khronos, the personification of time. And during the Renaissance, this notion gave rise to the idea of Father Time. So the words that we know today, chronology, chronic, anachronism and chronicle, all derive from Father Time and Kronos. Locus in quo. As you know, I live by the River Thames, and I've been working hard at home this last week, so I haven't actually travelled anywhere. I've been working on my novel, which is going to be out later in the year. I've been doing some editing on that, and I've been working on marketing for Moondog and the Reed Leopard, and I've been doing some other work. But it doesn't stop me going down to the river, which is 100 yards from where I live, and walking along the riverbank. I live on the north side of the River Thames, on an island called Penton Hook Island. It's a hook in the river. And often I walk along there to get some peace and relaxation, but also get inspiration. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about River Thames. The River Thames has been a site of pagan ritual and sacred rites and popular celebrations since ancient times. And the river has its own deity, Old Father Thames, whose hair and beard becomes the waves and the rivulets of the river itself. And if you see a picture of Old Father Thames, it will bring to mind the Ganges and Shiva. If you look at Shiva, you'll see that the hair actually becomes the river and vice versa. And this is quite interesting because according to the Journal of Biological Chemistry, up to 60% of a human adult body is indeed water. So the notion that a god or a human could be part water and part water could be a god or human isn't too hard to get to grips with. A human can be a river and a river can be a human. I like Peter Ackroyd's Thames, the Sacred River, and I find it to be the best source of knowledge about what is known as London's river. But as you know, it goes past my house and I live at least 12 miles from London. In fact, it's the longest river in England. It travels 215 miles and passes through several manifestations from the Thames headway to the tideway, and then it meets the North Sea. Old Father Thames is probably part of a group of deities called the river gods. The overarching river god is probably Okerlus. Sophocles suggests he can be a rambling ball once, then a writhing snake, of gleaming colours, then again a man, with an ox-like face, and from his beard's dark shadows, stream upon stream of water tumble down. Since Roman times, Okerlus is often depicted reduced to a mask and used decoratively as an emblem of water. So his uncut hair become wreathed with reeds. And I've asked myself often, is this the Green Man? According to Greek myth, Okerlus is the source of all knowledge. He mourned the loss of one of his horns in combat with Heracles or the Roman Hercules, and this horn became the fabled Horn of Plenty. The cornucopia has become a symbol of thanksgiving and harvest. Ackroyd, in Thames, the Sacred River, suggests that this horn transforms into an urn, which is held by the Old Father Thames, suggesting perhaps that once tamed, the river can be fruitful and life-giving. Deity Okerlus has been given the gift of perpetual self-renewal, so he holds the secret of eternal youth. And that's how we get the term, the fountain of youth. And yet, Thames, Old Father Thames, isn't Old Father. So why did the god choose this guise? Myth and Magic News. This week, Grianan of Aileach. This month, the Irish government listed the ancient Grianan of Aileach, just 7 miles from Derry in the County Donegal, as a national monument. The fort is perched above the County Donegal village of Burt and attracts thousands of visitors every year. The fort is a powerful manifestation of what remains of ancient Ireland, and on a clear day, and from its pinnacle, you can glimpse 3 counties, Donegal, Derry and Tyrone. The commanding and spectacular waterways of Lough Swilly and Lough Foyle lie to its west and east, respectively. But in the 19th century, the fort, once home to kings of Gaelic order, was rapidly disintegrating. It was, however, saved by the vision of one man who spearheaded its restoration over 140 years ago. The Victorian archaeologist George Petrie first surveyed the Grianan of Aileach in the 1830s. The earth banks of the hilltop ring fort are probably later Bronze Age or perhaps Iron Age, and there's a small spring dedicated to St Patrick. George Petrie found a circle of 10 stones and some interesting artefacts, including an ancient gaming board, which makes us suppose that Bronze Age people perhaps played some form of chess. The word Grianan means sunny place, and there's a theory that the hill fort might have been a temple to the sun. It's probable that the kings of Aileach held their inauguration ceremonies at the fort, and it became a ceremonial capital of their realm. It's even said that St Patrick himself blessed a symbolic flagstone at the fort, and it's believed that this is the inauguration stone known as St Columba's Stone, which is now found in Belmont House School, Derry. According to Irish folklore, the ring fort is said to have been built by the Dagda, who was a father figure. A king, he was also a famous druid. The Dagda was a bearded man who wore a cloak and carried a magic staff, and one end of the staff could kill, while the other end of the staff could revive and heal. The Dagda was also known as the names the Horseman, the Great Father, and the Horned Man. Does the Dagda remind you of anyone? Don't forget, in episode 1 of Myth and Magic, I discussed Woden and his guise as the Wanderer, and I suggested that perhaps Woden is the basis for Gandalf and Merlin. Is Dagda also the Wanderer? And also, I've wondered whether or not Dagda is the Cerne Abbas Giant. The Cerne Abbas Giant, which I'll cover in a future show, is also called the Rude Man of Cerne. But he carries, well, it looks like a blunt instrument, but you could call it a staff. Magical word of the week. VERÐIR. VERÐIR. In Norse mythology, the VERÐIR is a warden spirit believed to follow the soul of every person from birth to death. The English word wraith is derived from the word, as are the words ward and warden. It is said that a warden of a dead person can also become a revenant, and then haunt particular spots. Later, under Christian influence, the wardens became what we think of now as guardian angels. A very old tree, most usually a linden, ash or an elm tree, that grows on a farm is often dubbed a warden tree. These guardian trees were said to have been taken from sacred groves, perhaps as saplings, by early Christian Germanic people who settled in Europe. It is said, for example, that the sacred temple of Uppsala in Sweden was protected by a warden tree. It was probably an evergreen yew, like you often see in churchyards in England, where the evergreen yews tend to protect the fabric of the building. Is the warden tree the inspiration for the werewood tree, as depicted in the Dance of Dragons from A Song of Ice and Fire? And is the heart's tree a warden tree? And are the ring wraiths VERÐIR? fantasy writers' terms. Bildungsroman. In literary criticism, a bildungsroman is a coming-of-age story that follows the psychological and moral growth of a protagonist from youth to adulthood. The first bildungsroman is agreed amongst scholars to be Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, a book written by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Thomas Carlyle translated Goethe's novel into English after its publication in 1824. The bildungsroman genre evolved from folklore tales of a dunce or youngish child going out into the world to seek his fortune. Emma by Jane Austen and Frankenstein by Mary Shelley are both examples of the bildungsroman novel, as is The Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison that I discussed in episode 2 of Myth and Magic. A parody of the genre is The Magic Mountain by German novelist Thomas Mann. I'm currently reading The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, 2013. I admit I've put it down more than once, and although I'm enjoying it, it's a bit heavy going. It's like the literary equivalent of eating too much bread pudding. But this bildungsroman won the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and it follows the coming of age of protagonist Theodore Decker as he rises from poor little rich boy to become an arch-criminal in an epic tale that reminds me very much of the kind of world described by Charles Dickens. The heroic fantasy novel The Name of the Wind, or The Kingskiller Chronicle Day 1 by Patrick Rothfuss, is probably one of the better recent fantasy novels that share the idea of a bildungsroman book. Bildungsroman. Wildflower of the Week. Water lily. Nymphaceae. My mother told everybody she knew that when I was born, the first water lily of the year came out in her mother-in-law's pond. On my birthday, it unfurled its petals. So each year, around about my birthday, I look out for the first water lilies as they stick their heads above the dark waters to open up to the sun. Of course, now I'm lucky enough to live in a place where wild water lilies grow. And around about my birthday, and they were about 2 days late this year, by the way, I see the first blossoms emerge on the River Thames. Water lilies are rooted in soil underwater, with leaves and flowers floating on the surface. But these leaves and flowers don't last all year, and eventually they submerge and hide under the muds again, to resurrect themselves the following year. In this way, they are the sign of high summer. And also, in this way, they are the sign of Lammas, which I discussed earlier. The white water lily is the national flower of Bangladesh and is on the seal of Bangladesh. The blue water lily is the national flower of Sri Lanka. It's also the birth flower of the star signs Pisces. Nelumbo is a genus of giant water lily, and it's also known as the lotus. It's the floral emblem of India and Vietnam. Nelumbo nucifera, also known as the Indian lotus or the sacred lotus, is grown as a crop. It's been cultivated for years and years for its edible seeds. The stamens can be dried and made into fragrant herbal teas, and the leaves can be used in steaming. Hindus venerate the plant, and Vishnu is described as the lotus-eyed one, and its unfolding petals suggest the expansion of the soul from muddy origins. This encapsulates the spiritual promise. In Buddhist symbolism, the lotus represents purity of the body, speech and mind, because the lily floats above the murky waters and is detached from the muddy materials below. According to tradition, the second Buddha was incarnated as an 8-year-old inside a lotus blossom that was floating on a lake. In Greek mythology, the lotus eaters were a tribe of people who lived on an island and whose only crop was the lotus. Although, to be fair, the lotus in this story may well have been the fruit of the jujube tree. Anyway, The fruit had narcotic properties, and this caused the island's inhabitants to live in peaceful apathy. Thus, a lotus eater is someone who spends their time indulging in pleasure and luxury rather than dealing with practical matters. A nymph is a minor female deity. She is usually young and beautiful, and she's found in rivers and springs. A common Renaissance motif was the sleeping nymph. In Waterhouse's 1896 oil painting Hylas and the Nymphs, the servant Hylas is depicted being enraptured and later abducted by the water nymphs. He came across them while seeking drinking water in a pond of water lilies. And you can see the yellow water lily that I have on the River Thames here in Staines in that painting. It's floating on the water and it adorns the nymph's hair. This week's call-outs. My first call-out is Eve Paludan. She's a paranormal mystery and urban fantasy writer who tends to create paranormal mystery romances. Eve's popular Witchy Business, the Witch Detectives series, brings supernatural witch mystery with wittiness, spirited dialogue, relationships and paranormal kicks. At the heart of her tale is Ellie Chambers. Ellie is an insurance investigator and she solves her cases using unconventional means. She uses supernatural skills because she's a witch. The books are kind of unusual because they redefine vampires in an unconventional way as well. Fans say that her series is enjoyable, believable and entertaining. Also wanted to call out Brian S. Converse. Converse is father, husband, veteran and writer of science fiction, fantasy and horror. His Rajani Chronicles started in 2017 and have illustrations by the amazingly talented Lawrence Mann. His stories follow the exploits of a Detroit police lieutenant named James Dempsey. Dempsey's on the verge of a career burnout but finds himself aboard an alien spacecraft with others from his own apartment block, and he's provided with extraordinary powers. It soon transpires that he's been abducted by the aliens, and they've taken him to help in the fight against the Kran Horde. The magic element of the book is that these stones are found within, and these stones bring about magical powers. Episode 3 of the Chronicle comes out this summer and sees Dempsey's superpowered humans face their final battle, working and fighting alongside the Rajani against the Kran Horde. Brian S. Converse.